Hi everybody and welcome back to the Coderoom. Now today we're going to continue our discussion of CSS and introduce you to new properties and new values. We've already styled headers and we've already styled paragraphs, and today we're talking all about styling links. Okay, so all the kind of styling and all the common styling you would do to links, and we're going to introduce you to something new called pseudo classes. All right, so let's just dive right in here. All right, so we have our web page here and we've been doing some fun styling. We've styled the headers like I said, and we styled the the paragraph. So let's move on to styling the links. Okay, so we have a couple links here and they're actually already in green. Okay, and that's because we actually had already styled them to look green, right? So here, this is our style file, and we have the selector A for anchor, which applies to links. And we've actually already set the color to green. Okay, so that's what's applied here. Now, we can do a lot of the normal things that we can do with paragraphs that we can do with links as well. So let's say we want to change the font size of a link. We can just simply type font size. And let's say we want the links to appear a little bit bigger. So we could say like 14 points and then semicolon. Save that, refresh. And there you go, the links are a little bit bigger. You can also do things like font weight, which we actually haven't introduced up until now. So font weight is how thick the font strokes will appear. And so this is probably more commonly used when you want to make something bold. Okay, you can do it with you can make things thinner, you can make things thicker, but more commonly we do that with by making things bold. So we can do something like this, font weight. Okay, and take it bold. So save that. And see now the font appears a little bit bolder, okay? Now you can actually do font weight for paragraph text. Actually, any text actually you want to do, you can actually use font weight, okay? And so those are some of the common things you can do with links. Now, there's more interesting things you can do with links, and one of the things is called text decoration, okay? So links by default, if you go to any website and they haven't restyled the links in any way, by default they actually are underlined. Okay, so how do you control a link from being underlined or not underlined? All right, so the way you do that is with a property called text decoration. Okay, so you can do text dash decoration. Okay, and by default for links this is underlined. Okay, and so if you want it not to be underlined, you have to override that default. And what you can do is you can basically say none. Okay? So if you refresh this, you'll see now the underlines are gone. Now text decoration again applies to any text. So for example, if you wanted to underline something, let's say like the headers, okay? By default, headers are not underlined. You could always do text decoration underline. Okay? So refresh, and you see that's there, okay? The only reason I bring that up now is just because by default, the default styles for our browser in links are underlined, okay? So I'm just gonna get rid of that text decoration there. Okay, so my links are looking pretty good here. All right, so those are some of the basic things you can do with links. But now we can try to introduce some extra styling behavior, okay? So let's say that you wanted the link to change when somebody hovers on it. Okay, this is a very common practice, right? You hover on a link or you hover on a button or something and it changes to let the user know that, oh, this is something that you can actually interact with, okay? So now we're gonna introduce the concept of what's called a pseudo class selector, okay? So up until now, we are used to selectors that look something like this, right? We would have the selector and it has the element, okay? So whether that be A for anchor, H1 for header, H2 for a second level header, P for paragraph. And then we apply a bunch of properties to that element, right? Okay, now what I want to do is just focus on that selector piece, okay? So in this slide here, we just have that selector and then we have a bunch of properties applied to it, okay? What you can do with CSS selectors is actually chain them, okay? And this will become more evident in future episodes when we talk about IDs and classes, okay? But today we're going to introduce you to the first instance of chaining CSS selectors, okay? So what we can do is we can have a bunch of properties that apply to the anchor tag, and then we can have a bunch of properties applied to the anchor tag when you hover on it, okay? And so this is what that looks like, okay? So the selector, you chain it with a colon hover on it, okay? So this is what is your selector chaining. In other words, you're putting another selector beside your original selector, okay? So, and in this case, you don't do it with any space, and you do it with a colon hover. Now, what I want to stress here is that the colon is not a separator between your two different selectors, okay? The colon actually belongs to the hover selector, okay? So it's actually this. Okay, so this is what your selectors actually look like. The first selector is A for anchor, and the second selector is actually colon hover, okay? And this will become more evident again in future lessons when we chain more and more things together, okay? So anytime you have a colon in front of a certain type of selector, that's known as a pseudo class, okay? And there's a couple of these that we'll explore in the future, and we'll explore two of them today, okay? So the first one is colon hover, okay? And let's see how that works. Okay, so what we have here is we have anchor and a bunch of properties applied to it, okay? And what this says is, okay, by default, we have all the browser styles, and then we are overriding those styles with these, the color green, the text decoration none, the font size 14, okay? And now we're gonna introduce another set of properties that when a person hovers on that link, it changes again, okay? So what we do, okay, is add a new CSS selector here, and it's gonna be anchor, but more specifically when you hover on it, okay? And then you have a set of properties in here. So what's gonna happen is the browser is going to take all of these classes together, okay? So it's going to take the default styles, plus the ones that you've overwritten, plus the ones that are assigned to the hover pseudo class, okay? And then it puts them all together. And this is the first instance we've seen of this idea of cascading styles together, okay? It's taking the default browser and your own and the hover ones and cascading them together, okay? So when we hover, let's say we want to change the color. Okay, so we'll say color blue. Okay, so we'll save that. Okay, we'll refresh the page. And you'll see by default they're still green. Okay, but when we hover on them, they change blue. Okay, so this is a way you can get them to change color when you hover. It's with these pseudo classes. Okay, so now if I click on one of these, say Engadget. Okay, and it brings me to the Engadget site. Okay. Now let's practice a little more with this. Okay, let's introduce another pseudo class. Okay, so another pseudo class is actually the word visited. So you can control what a link looks like if you actually been to that page. Okay, so we'll add another class here, a visited, and let's say the color for that will be red. Okay, so save that, refresh the page. And there you go. Okay, so I've actually been to Engadget, I've been to YouTube, and so it says that I visited those pages. Now when I hover on them, okay, you'll see that the visited tag actually takes precedent over the hover tag, okay? Now there's all these rules to CSS in terms of what takes precedent over what, and again, that's for a future episode, okay? Now you'll see though, if I hover on Google, it turns blue, and if I click on Google, okay, now that I visit that site, I come back, and there you go. Okay, I've actually visited that site. Now what's interesting is you see the greatest search engine actually also got changed to red, but that's because they're both the same site. If you look at our code, again on the index page, and you look at the links, both those links point to google.com, and that's why they both turn red. Okay? All right, so that is another type of selector called a pseudo class selector, okay? And then what you can do is you can chain it onto other elements, all right? That's it for this episode. We'll see you guys in the next one.